What is up, watchers of YouTube? Today, I'm coming at you with another video. In this one, we're going to be having a little philosophical discussion of sorts. And I'm going to provide you with some food for thought, a little counter-argument to the very common saying that you've probably heard quite a few times about how gear doesn't matter. I'm going to start off with a full disclosure that my actual opinion in the grand scheme of things is that I agree gear doesn't really matter. But sometimes it's fun to play devil's advocate and just provide a little bit of a different viewpoint. But I also do think that for certain reasons, gear does actually matter. And those reasons are what we're going to get into here today. So first off, I would never sit here and have the opinion and tell somebody that you need to have some crazy expensive gear in order to make music a certain way. In fact, I think the exact opposite. One of the big points of the whole gear doesn't matter argument is that the best music gear is the gear that you already have. And I wholeheartedly agree with that, and my opinion on that will never change. But that same point is kind of also the same reason why gear does matter. It would be pretty stupid for us to sit here and act like changing the gear that you use doesn't change the way that your music sounds. It's just kind of common sense, right? You use a different guitar, your guitar sound's gonna sound different. If you use a different microphone, it's gonna affect the way that your voice sounds on the recording. Using one guitar pedal or compressor or whatever versus another is gonna produce a different sound. That's why there are so many different options when it comes to gear. The music gear that you use in your studio setup is ultimately going to define your style and your sound as an artist. If everybody had the nicest, most expensive music gear, music would sound pretty boring. The same way that if everybody had the cheapest, most inexpensive gear, it would all sound pretty boring too. The individuality of the gear that you have, whether it ranges from super cheap beginner stuff to more expensive, is what's going to make your music unique to you. When it comes to making music, a big thing that everybody's chasing is trying to have your own signature sound and style that is yours. And the way that you achieve that is by knowing what you like and what you don't like. It's like the whole Rick Rubin thing. Being very sure of your taste is a very valuable thing.
I have no technical ability, and I know nothing about music.
But if you're not really ever trying out new gear, you're not able to see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So absolutely the best music gear to use is the gear that you already have, and that is why gear matters, because that gear that you already have is going to have a specific sound to it. I'm gonna hit my head on the fan, actually. Another important detail to mention is that a lot of the gear doesn't matter people, they still own a ton of plugins. They'll be like, yeah guys, gear doesn't matter, whatever, but then they have like $1,000 worth of Waves plugins and what's that fancy EQ one? Fab Filter, that's what it is. They got a bunch of Pro Fab Filter, Pro Q plugins and whatnot. I hate to break it to you, but that still kind of constitutes as gear. The majority of plugins that exist are based off of some sort of hardware thing. There are a lot of situations where a specific plugin can do something that a hardware piece of gear could never do, but there are also a lot of things that hardware can do that plugins just simply can't do. For example, when you use a fully analog synth or guitar pedal or piece of outboard gear, certain imperfections and random things are going to happen to the signal that you can't account for, and you can't really recreate that well in a computer. And that's not even taking into account recording live instruments and everything, because that's a whole other animal. Also, more to the point that the majority of all plugins come from some sort of hardware gear. Getting the actual physical gear can really help you to better understand how those plugins are working in your computer. Using a compressor and being able to actually physically touch the knobs and see what it's doing in real time really helps you to get a better grasp on kind of how these things work. Just really over the last 15-20 years has everything kind of moved onto the computer, but at one point the computer stuff, all the plugins and everything, weren't even an option. So another pretty important aspect of getting new gear is something that was illustrated pretty well by Chris Novoselic, the bassist from Nirvana. There's an interview where he's basically saying that he would go to pawn shops and always look for left-handed guitars, because Kurt Cobain was left-handed, and he was saying that every time Kurt would get a new guitar, he would just instantly write like 10 songs.
Kurt ever got a new guitar, he would just get infatuated with it, and there's like 10 songs right there. He would just be playing it all the time, playing it all the time.
It was actually a pretty sad story because he was talking about how after Kurt passed away, he kept forgetting that he didn't need to look for left-handed guitars anymore. But it's a story that does a really good job of illustrating how inspiring it can be when you get a new guitar or pedal or microphones or whatever. And I know for me personally, I'm the same way. Every time I get a new pedal, I'm just inspired with a bunch of new ideas. If I get a new guitar, it always kind of forces me to play in different ways and come up with melodies and chord progressions in new ways that I hadn't thought of before. So in my opinion, this is one of the biggest reasons why gear does matter, because it can really help to inspire you to create new stuff. And also just in general, some people work better with a more tactile, physical workflow. The same way that just in general in life, some people are more kinetic learners. I think in general, if something helps you to make more music and make you feel inspired, it should never be seen as a bad thing. You know, obviously, within reason. Another thing that I'm just a pretty big proponent of these days is that just collecting gear and building up your home studio can be a really fun hobby just in of itself, separate from the whole music thing. Disclaimer on this one, make sure that you're actually still making music and not just getting caught up in the collecting aspect. The same reason why anybody collects anything, because it's cool to have a certain collection of something that you care about. And if you can make that a relatively healthy hobby that also feeds into you making music, that's just a win-win. And another big factor that I feel like not a lot of people talk about is that each piece of gear that you collect in your studio is going to have a story behind it. You can point to anything in my room right now and I can tell you the story behind how I got it, who I bought it from, where I went to go pick it up. Pretty much almost everything that I have in my studio has some sort of little story or adventure behind it, which is super cool because it just means that everything in your studio has a little bit of history and it makes your whole music creation process a lot more sentimental and meaningful to you overall. I'm willing to bet that almost 100% of the time, if I ask somebody off the street, would you rather hear a song where the guitar is somebody's grandpa's that was passed down through 3 generations, or would you rather have the song where the guitar is a VST plugin? I'd say if you're a sane, normally functioning person, you're probably gonna go with grandpa's guitar. With pretty much any and every form of art, the story is king. Everything revolves around the story that you tell, and if you don't have a good story, then you don't really have a great piece of art. And it just compounds the effect when all of the gear that you use to make that art also has a story as well. Alright, but let's get away from the sentimental, emotional stuff and talk about an actual, real logistical thing, which is resale value. When you buy a piece of gear, that can actually be considered an investment. Now this obviously largely depends on the instrument that you're buying. If you're buying like a Squire Bullet Strat, that thing is probably never going to gain value over time, but it will retain some of its value, which is an important thing. Naturally, if you're buying a more rare instrument that has something special about it, that is going to gain value over time, which is generally just a worthwhile investment. But either of those options is better than buying plugins, because the second that you buy a plugin, the value of that plugin is now 0. You can't resell it. Once I bought Nexus or Omnisphere or whatever, that $500 that I spent on the plugin is now just essentially down the drain. Obviously, I'm getting value out of using the plugin and everything like that, but if I spent $500 on a guitar, I can eventually turn around and sell that guitar for like $400, $350. So in the long run, I'm really only spending like $150 if I decided to sell it in the future. Just to be clear on this, I'm not anti-plugins, and I'm not saying that you should never buy plugins, because there will definitely be plugins that you're gonna need. I'm mostly just bringing up the plugin thing because it directly applies to the resale value point that I'm making here. But also, if we're considering plugins as gear and you're gonna need plugins, then that's even further to the point that gear does matter. And another huge factor when it comes to this is that eventually all computer stuff that you have now is going to be obsolete. I gotta give credit to Rhett Scholl for this point because he made a video about this and it was very insightful. He was basically just talking about anything that has some sort of digital computer thing integrated into it is eventually going to become obsolete once the newer models come out and they stop making firmware updates for it and everything. Whereas if you have, say, a Fender Twin Reverb from the 60s, that amp is always going to do what it was designed to do. The majority of anything hardware and analog is going to have pretty much an infinite shelf life. And you guys know me, I'm a big anti-AI, anti-computers and social media type of guy. So anything that we can do as humans to move further away from all of the computer crap is a positive thing in my eyes. So just on principle alone, I would rather buy each individual Boss pedal rather than spend my money on like the Boss plug-out microtransaction pedal. So guys, all in all, at the end of the day, my opinion is that the best gear is the gear that you already have. And you should never go out and buy a specific guitar or pedal or amp just because some famous person says they use it. And you should absolutely just be making music as much as possible, regardless of what gear you have. Gear does matter for a lot of different reasons, but it should never ever be the determining factor in you being able to create music. But I also think, simultaneously, that a lot of the gear doesn't matter. People really kind of demonize the idea of buying new gear and collecting gear. If getting that new guitar or getting that new pedal or whatever is going to inspire you to make more music, then there's absolutely no reason you shouldn't go ahead and do it if you're doing it in a healthy and financially responsible way, or maybe not. Should I fix my car instead of buying another keyboard? But yeah, that's it, guys. At the end of the day, don't listen to me. I'm just some guy on the internet. Don't listen to anybody. This could be AI. I could be feeding you some propaganda right now. Nothing's real. The internet isn't real. Just do whatever floats your boat, because we only live once, and life is too short to spend it stressing out about things that people say on the internet. But anyways, that's pretty much going to do it for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed this little philosophical conversation that we've had here today. I know it was a bit of a short video, a bit of a different one here today, but nonetheless, I'm very appreciative of all of you guys watching. Stay safe out there, go touch some grass, and I will see you all in the next